All right. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. We're going to go ahead and get started. Looks like we've got folks calling in from all over the world. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Any Truman Show fans to, everyone who's calling in from all over. Well, first off, thank you all so much for joining, and a huge thank you to David for joining us. David is the former head of global talent development for Goldman Sachs and has had a super distinguished career. So really appreciate him taking the time today. I guess before we jump in, just a few kind of housekeeping items. So we'll email the recording to everyone after. If you have questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A and we will get to them near the end. And then additionally, our goal for this conversation is that it's an open conversation series. And so David and I will go through a number of our kind of predictions and the trends that we're seeing for the year ahead. But then also, if anyone has either quick comments or questions relative to those, feel free to throw them in chat or in Q&A. Well, so David, welcome. I guess would love to just start by having you give kind of a brief introduction for folks who may not know of your background and why you're here, and then we'll jump in.
Sure, happy to. And while I'm doing my introduction, Ryan, I can't turn my video on. It says it's locked. So if you can do the big reveal as I'm talking. So David Landman, great to be here. I have just finished a 20-year career at Goldman Sachs, doing a number of things, but primarily in the talent space. So L&D was one of the things under my remit, but really the broad focus was how do we make people feel more connected, more like they're developing and have greater clarity as they're developing in their careers, from the moment they join, as they progress through different levels until the moment they leave. Like I said, I concluded that aspect of my career. I'm now in some chapter 2 where I'm building up a portfolio of activities. And one of the things that I've always been really passionate about is helping to support the founders who are building the next generation of products that are going to make the workplace better for everyone. So I found Ryan, Michael, and Arist, was really impressed with what they're doing. So I'm doing some work to support them. But really what I'm doing right now is trying to build community in the CHRO community, as well as help to support all the people who are trying to make the workplace better for everyone.
Awesome. Well, David, like I said, thank you so much for joining us. I'm glad we got your video on there for the reveal. You look exactly like your profile picture, so as promised there. Well, so for all the folks joining, this is going to be a conversation. We're going to cover a lot in a pretty short period of time. And so for us, a lot of this data is from most of our customer base, from Arist internally, but then also just from a lot of our partners, and even folks like the Josh Bersin Academy, who we work with on what we're going to see for the year ahead. And so we believe really broadly, 2024 is going to be the year of, first off, AI, right? That trend's not going to surprise anyone, but scaled AI adoption is finally here. And I'll get a little bit into what we mean by that. Additionally, the other big kind of thing we're going to see this year and the trend that's going to come as a result of that is going to be AI's impact on L&D teams. And so we believe really firmly that AI is actually going to enable a lot of L&D teams to become this shift from cost centers to revenue drivers, which we'll get into in a little bit. And then finally, 2024 will really be the year of autonomous learning. And so we're going to see this massive shift from pull first kind of shelf life strategy for most of L&D and most of content into a push first strategy that's going to be the new normal. And so David and I are going to dig into a bunch of these different things just over the next 45 minutes or so. And so really broadly, like I said, for that first trend, scaled AI adoption is finally here. And what we mean by finally here is that the past few years have really seen an uptrend of AI, but it's sort of been something that everyone is tentative around, they're cautious of, they don't really know what the benefits and the fallbacks are going to be. And so in early 2020, we see GPT-3 come out in the first tooling from OpenAI. In 2021, we really see this advent of AI tooling for consumers. And so the first types of things that folks like you and I can access, it's not an infrastructure tool built for developers, but it's something where the average person or worker can go in and can use a lot of these AI tools. Then we see this mass awareness of AI capabilities with ChatGPT, obviously, in December of 2022. And that really kind of opened the floodgates for just an understanding of AI and really just how far along and how advanced it was versus what most folks thought. And this past year was kind of a holding period for AI and sort of a limbo period for it. We saw a lot of companies come back to even to us and just say, hey, we think AI is really foundational. We think it's going to change everything. but we're not ready. We're unsure. We think it's inventing a lot of information, right? And so this past year was really more about hesitancies for AI. And a lot of the tooling has actually caught up and surpassed those hesitancies. Things like closed loop instances that won't send your public information out to the web, right? And so we really believe that this year is going to be the advent of en masse AI adoption within organizations. This is the first year we're going to see this broad rollout of AI adoption within a lot of companies, and then ultimately a sustained business impact next year. We'll see things like, hey, our earnings report had a massive impact, or we saw a massive impact to the top or bottom line because of AI. And so in terms of how AI is going to affect us, something David and I were chatting about was really just the main ways that AI is going to impact the L&D landscape. And so it's going to aid in needs analysis more broadly. It'll significantly enhance creation of content, a bunch of different capabilities. And then it's really going to enable bespoke experiences to the individual. So David, I know you work with a bunch of different organizations and you've really seen this develop over the past few years. Could you speak a bit just to how AI is going to impact L&D and HR in these specific areas?
Yeah, so I'm particularly excited about AI because I actually think the adoption, the availability and adoption of AI is going to close a gap that we as people professionals have experienced for quite a long time. And like I said, I spent 20 years of my career as an operator. For the first half of my career, I wish that there was just good HR technology to solve and scale some of the basic problems I was solving. Then we entered the golden age when there was great tech, but there was still some gap in capability. I think AI is now going to actually eliminate that gap and allow us as people professionals and L&D professionals to really achieve and scale the things that we've been trying to do for many years. And I think L&D is a really good example. And the three items that you have up on the screen, Ryan, are also great examples because you think about the work that is currently done to understand, especially in large organizations, but certainly in organizations of all sizes, understand what are the things that we actually have to educate people on. And not just the basics, like not just having like the basic kind of soft skills that we always do, which are important, but also having the opportunity to really dive into all the data that's available to us, including, for example, performance review data, to intelligently pick out the common themes of both where individuals are expressing that they want to learn, but also where others are indicating these are the power skills that actually are the ones that make the biggest impact on somebody's ability to perform in an organization. That's just really hard work right now, and it's going to get dramatically easier. Then once you understand that, thinking about how do you create content, and I'll say, like, I don't know how many people on this call have started to use ChatGPT to create their own content or other AI models, but wow, it's incredible. And the ability to take some ideas and turn them into a really good first draft saves, I mean, dozens of hours sometimes. And if you think about what L&D professionals, where they spend their time, which we're going to get into, a lot of it is like creating and iterating on content. Somebody in the chat used the term creative partner. I think that's a perfect description of what AI is. And then lastly, I want to say most importantly, but without the first and the second thing, you wouldn't have the third. But in terms of the actual experience for the individual, when you think about its AI's ability to really curate bespoke learning opportunities for people, both on what they need to learn, when they learn best, and how they learn best, probably in bite-sized chunks. That's really going to be a game changer in terms of how we are able to push out learning to individuals, because despite our great intentions as L&D professionals, oftentimes we create great content, but actually getting people to interact with it and consume it is one of the hardest parts.
Absolutely. Yeah, and couldn't agree more, David. I think one thing I'll kind of just highlight that you mentioned there is that entire idea of enabling bespoke experiences almost being the output of these other two things, right? If I've accurately assessed what kind of needs and capabilities are needed within an organization, if I've broken down a role to its, its core capabilities, and then I've created content that's actually going to help, then that's what really allows for customized experiences. When we talk to a lot of L&D leaders, something that they always struggle with is you basically have this giant gap in the middle where you've got all these programs and events that are all highly centralized and they're not customized to the individual at all. And then you've got all of these, most development that happens through managers, right? As most development happens on the job or through management currently. And so you essentially have this huge gap in the middle where we're saying, hey, with managers, it's very one-on-one, it's handheld, but it's so hard when we've got thousands of or tens of thousands of managers to actually understand, are folks even getting a good experience? We could have 60-70% of our population not having what we would consider a even close to ideal development experience, right? And on the other end of that, okay, we've got a one size fits all or many, which in that case, all might be 40% of the organization, right? And so you've got kind of this huge gap in the middle. And so AI can be a big component in solving that. So I think one other really interesting component of this, we talked about enhancing creation. For a lot of folks, you've probably gone on a few of these sort of trends or AI webinars, and we find that a lot of folks will talk through, oh, we've got AI capabilities, and we talk about what AI can do. I think just to enhance discussion, we wanted to show you all a little bit about what actual AI development looks like. And so I'm just going to pull this up here. So this is an example of Sidekick. For those who haven't seen it, it's our internal AI course builder. But this is an example for us of folks don't realize just how fast along and how accurate AI is getting. And so in this case, I'll take this example. We're going to go ahead and upload documentation. And so we're going to say, okay, let's say we are Pfizer and we've got documentation around Paxlovid, right? AI is great at inventing, but it's also great at converting current materials into different formats. We're going to take this huge PDF on everything Paxlovid from Pfizer. We can go ahead, in this case, upload it into this AI generation tool, and then we can say, okay, here's our topic, understanding it and prescribing it to patients. Our audience in this case would be clinicians, maybe it's sales reps or caregivers. Our purpose is to help them understand what it is and how to administer it. And again, while this is going on, the system is pulling from the internet, but it's also, it's been trained in over 1 million different types of courses, and it's pulling in the information from this PDF. And I think a crucial stepping function in a lot of this AI development was the opening of what we call closed loop systems, right? Or the ability for folks like Pfizer to upload this documentation and not actually have it go train a larger model. Obviously, this is a publicly available PDF we grabbed online. Anyone can go find this, but for company sensitive information, that becomes really crucial. And so again, what AI is going to do in this instance after ingesting that information is it's going to create an output. In this case, it introduces us to the drug, goes through dosing schedules. This is just an outline, drug interactions, edge cases, effective treatment. So it's very scenario based, right? It's not just kind of inventing new information. And then as a result, if we go ahead and hit generate course, as we can see in here, it's actually generated full lessons for us, multiple choice questions, scenarios, outputs. And so the whole point of this is it's not just, AI today is not just a ChatGPT type format where we're running 100 different prompts. We're actually seeing some pretty advanced tooling that's allowing us to, as L&D professionals, significantly decrease the time it costs us to create. So David, I know that we'd spoken about this a few weeks ago for the first time, and I'd shown this to you. As a professional who spent over 20 years in the space, what was your first reaction when you saw types of AI like this, or AI kind of converting en masse and at scale?
I mean, this is the thing that made me want to work with you and Michael and the Arist team, because I was blown away when I first saw it. So my experience, I actually picked a random document. It was a 30-page document from one of my former employers that was publicly available. It was on the public in the public domain, but it was about content that I was very close to. And I basically said, like, take this PDF, throw it into Sidekick, and let's see what it creates. And what it created was probably 90% ready to go off the shelf. It was high quality, bite-sized, covered all of the right points, but it did it in like 2 minutes compared to what would have taken probably a month plus of internal discussion to create a curriculum. Now, I saw somebody in the chat mention, everything still needs to be evaluated by subject matter experts and designers. Absolutely, but taking away 90% of the work, much of it administrative, or at least early drafting work, and letting people focus their time on responding to their creative thought partner who developed this and putting the finishing touches on it, making sure that the content was correct, it was unbiased, it was using the right language, and so on. Getting to that starting point is it's a game changer, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll even notice in this output here, right? It's not pushing something live. It's all editable. And I think just to highlight what you mentioned there, for us, what we really see is this isn't going to replace instructional designers or SMEs, right? As a result, it's actually going to enhance a lot of their capabilities. As an SME, I no longer need to say, hey, I'm now going to go through all this, this 100-page PDF, pick out the most important points, package this all together. I'm going to be able to be much more strategic. And we'll get into that in a little bit, but I'm going to be able to be really selective about what I spend my time with. I can output more content, better content, and really just, again, there's a reason we call it sidekick, is because that individual is still kind of the main driver of that content. I think in addition to we can create really great content, right? But it's only great if people see it. And so I think that this is another capability we've seen of AI, is really just the ability to actually recommend learning at the right time. And again, we'll dig into this a bit more, but we've seen this huge shift from learning being something that people go to learning being able to be recommended to folks. And so it can pull data. We're at a place now where AI can pull data from an LMS or HRS system, or even a CRM like a Salesforce, right? And really have intelligent nudging and reinforcement. Hey, David, I know you're working on this. I know you've got this meeting coming up. I'm going to prompt learning to come to you at the right time. And I think 2024 will be the first year that we actually see the advent of a lot of that tooling. How do you think kind of shifts like that and in intelligent nudging and reinforcement will change just the learner experience more broadly?
I mean, I think it will dramatically improve it across probably every aspect that we measure. I we I don't know any learning professionals who don't have a problem in getting everybody to consume at the right time the great content that they've created. And I think, being able to intelligently push out learning, kind of right content, right time in the right format, will greatly increase the amount of adoption, but also absorption, and give people in very bite-sized ways the right skills to exercise in that moment and therefore actually learn and develop like we intend. I'm not saying they're not now, but I think we can dramatically increase the quality of the interactions and also the actually amount of kind of behavior change that we're experiencing if we're able to better nudge, just like happens right now on our smartphones, right? We're all getting notifications. Even it looks like you're working out. Do you want to record this workout? Or I get a notification from my dog's activity tracker. It looks like PD hasn't had enough activity today. You might want to take him out. Like, we get those nudges as is. I'd love to get those for learning as well. And I think most learners would.
And we'll get into nudging and everything soon, but I think it's a really good point there. And the last piece of this, if we can create really great content and we can nudge folks and we can get them to take it, is for an L&D professional. A lot of what this was enable, and we'll get into this more in depth in Trend 2, is really just the ability to be a lot more strategic. And so we're now getting to a place where if we're nudging folks, if we're interacting with them constantly, we're collecting about 100 times as much data on the individual as something like an LMS that someone checks once every 2 months would, right? And so if I constantly, let's say I'm a new manager and all day I'm going back and forth with my AI learning systems about here's how to be a better manager, here's how to give and receive feedback, here's how to have a career conversation, right? All that data can be ingested. And then as an L&D professional, an HR professional, we can actually go in and be really strategic about, okay, we've got all of this treasure trove of data and responses. Let's start to see if we can use that to predict turnover challenges or to predict what's happening more broadly, right, within the business. David, any thoughts just how this will shift to the kind of the role and the seat at the table for L&D professionals?
Yeah, I mean, broadly speaking, like beyond L&D, having access to real insights that can help us move the needle in the right direction as people leaders, it's kind of like the holy grail, right? And for people who have well-skilled people analytics teams, they might spend months working on data sets to generate some really important insights. The fact that now AI is going to be able to constantly track engagement and people's experiences and ultimately the impact on their performance in the business, and then be able to surface to us in a much faster, lower lift way the themes of the things that we should be focusing on to help further enable learning and ultimately business performance, it's just another way in which AI is going to completely change the game. And it's going to enable us to get better insights faster. And I suspect more insights as well, including the ones that are perhaps more subtle to detect. And it's just going to make us better and smarter as professionals.
Absolutely. And then just for time, kind of moving on to trend two here, one thing we talk about is that whole idea of using this data to make us better and smarter and more predictive as professionals. For us, something David and I had talked about before is kind of the next level order of AI. So we know, like we just talked about, AI is going to be this great generative tool. It's going to help us understand needs, bring learning to people at the right time. But all of that will enable L&D to really become more of a revenue driving center. And so I'll get into a little bit of what we mean by that. But just to kind of set some context, 2023, 2024, as we know, David, right, has been a really tough year for businesses, especially last year. We're seeing the pace of business increase. For most industries, they are seeing declined sales, a lot of macroeconomic factors there. And there's these really high rates of turnover and what's kind of called quiet quitting, or people even staying a job, but just being completely disengaged, right? And so we know from all of this that there's increasing pressures from multiple sides. The business needs to move faster. The business leaders are saying we need to cut costs, right? Some folks are saying this is the year where the CFO is going to control the entire business, right? Just because of the level of budget cuts more broadly. I think with that context in mind, what we're seeing within L&D is that L&D today is often not empowered to solve some of these big challenges, right? This probably doesn't surprise a lot of L&D leaders listening in, but about 4% of CEOs from HBR and McKinsey research feel like learning and training has a meaningful ROI, but over 90% feel like that same learning function or L&D needs doesn't respond to needs fast enough. And so we know that business leaders think this stuff is really, really important, but at the same time, don't feel kind of confidence in that ability to respond. And one thing that we talked through was kind of this whole idea of the evolution of L&D from cost centers to revenue drivers. And for folks listening, really think about kind of where you'd bucket certain elements of your L&D team in here. We defined a cost center here as being more reactive to challenges, low adoption, long time to delivery, and really just delivering learning when requested. We think that AI will be a huge enabler for L&D teams to become revenue drivers, where they foresee those challenges, they're really prescriptive, and they can deliver rapidly with a high time to adoption. David, obviously, this is a huge, simplified bifurcation, and there's a lot of folks that probably fall a little bit somewhere in the middle. What do you think is really required in terms of just the mindset, the tools, the strategies of an L&D team to be more in the bucket on the right than the bucket on the left? Any advice for folks broadly there?
I mean, I think to be seen as a revenue driver, you as a learning professional need to really have deep relationships and understanding of the businesses that you're supporting, including how best to upskill people and actually get them to, again, to consume content. I think the biggest issue that's holding people back right now is the fact that so much of our time is spent on administrative tasks. And also, so much of our energy is spent on those things. So when you think about creation, managing technology, chasing people to do things, running around trying to figure out what to do with all the metrics, all those things take away time and energy from the real strategic work. And by the way, that's real work also that needs to be done. But the more strategic work that I think we all want to do as advisors, I believe that, and you and I have talked about this at length, Ryan, that when we take away some of those other activities that are consuming the time and energy of our learning professionals, they will just have more bandwidth and opportunity to spend more time as strategic partners to the business and deliver even more and more targeted content than ever before.
Absolutely. And I see a question in chat just kind of on that point around, how are L&D becoming revenue drivers, right? How do we really measure ROI? Could you speak to that a little bit, just in terms of how these things would enable L&D to drive revenue as opposed to being more of a cost center?
Yeah, I mean, to put it simply, if we can upskill people, particularly in a time when skills are changing, maybe not faster than ever, but at a very rapid pace, to enable them to have the agility to better tackle the business problems of tomorrow, we are directly contributing to that person, that team's that business's ability to respond to the market and ultimately help to generate revenue.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest impacts just to that question, this is kind of a nice segue here, is really how L&D time spend is going to shift, right? And so we know that AI is going to augment a lot of capabilities. David, I know one thing we've talked a lot about is changing just the administrative overhead time for L&D. And so on the left here for folks, as you can see, a ton of L&D time right now, we've run a bunch of internal surveys on this, is spent on managing technology, creating content, and then being sort of a marketing function, right? Trying to email folks and trying to get them to adopt this. In the post L&D, post AI L&D time spent is going to look quite different. David, could you speak a bit to, what will be kind of the biggest impact to the L&D team broadly of just these shifts in time spent?
I mean, ultimately, I think the biggest impact will be what we just talked about, the ability for L&D professionals to have more of a seat at the table as strategic revenue drivers. But actually, just to simplify it, we've got a bunch of L&D professionals on this call. I would just pose the rhetorical question, if you could have a job on the left of the screen or job on the right of the screen, like which job would you want? I think most people aspire to and dream about the time when they can spend a lot of time with strategic planning, insight, and understanding of the key trends and impacts of what they're doing. But most of us are mired down in first level of creation, chasing people and monitoring compliance, and all the administrative tasks that perhaps many of us have gotten good at, but wouldn't it be a wonderful world where we can spend more of our time on strategy? So I think, like, to me, this is the slide that in a way sums up a lot of what we've been talking about. And I guess to give a different answer to your question, since we've got a bunch of HR and learning professionals on this call, I think that job is going to get better as a result of AI. I think it's going to be a more interesting, more strategic, and more impactful job because we're automating a lot of the administrative and first line creation tasks.
Absolutely. And so just to kind of sum up for folks, again, if there's one takeaway from this, it's that the less time we as learning professionals can spend on that administrative work, the more time it allows us, if we have that predictive data in hand, like we talked about, to actually go back to the business and to provide a lot of those strategic insights, right? More broadly, I think one other big component of this in shifting a lot of this is you'll see us kind of reduce the amount of time spent on tech, the amount of time spent on creation. But a big push here you'll also see is a huge reduction in the time spent on pushing for adoption, right? And something that is a big component of this is even if we have all of this rapid development happening, the bottleneck to getting all of that data to be predictive, to be a strategic partner to the business, often is adoption. And so one thing we wanted to kind of, show folks, because a big component of this trend of being a revenue driver is actually being able to drive actually getting folks to take learning, right? Actually being able to collect a lot of data. And the best way for folks to do that are these adoption optimized learning models that have come out. Kind of a part of this trend is we're really going to see this be the year of all of these learning models that are, we're calling them adoption optimized, right? But are smaller and bite-sized, that are really spaced out. If you're familiar with microlearning, right, it's a tenet similar to that. And that are really pragmatic about practice and delivered where people are. We find that for most learning, folks are using, we've seen even in 2023, folks are using AI, they're creating great content, and then they're still getting, 5, 10, 15% uptake rates of their total expected, audience when they push a lot of that out. And so we think that this will also be a big component and kind of tidal wave of a lot of this shift in 2024 is really just delivering a lot of this learning where people are. And so we can talk about making things bite-sized and spaced out, but that kind of final component of delivering things where people are, we think is the most essential to this. And obviously this is what we've built a lot of our work on. What we find is that 0.2% of time is spent in something like an LMS, but more than 80% is spent in SMS, WhatsApp, Slack, Microsoft Teams. And actually, think back to these 4 outcomes that I showed. You're going to see more of an outcome even from delivering learning where people are than from everything else combined, even though these are all really, really foundational, right? And so to really drive results, that is kind of the biggest single impact thing that we as L&D leaders can do is really meet people where they are. And so again, we'll kind of get into more of this later, but there is going to be this massive shift in the types of tools, the types of mediums that folks are actually receiving content on. And so whether that's frontline employees or desk-based employees, we are going to see this massive bifurcation of adoption optimized tools. David, thoughts broadly just on kind of meeting people where they are in general and how you've seen this kind of shift L&D, where does this work and where does it not, in the context of how we're bringing learning to people?
Yeah, look, I think you said it really well. The way in which people interact with the world and the devices that they use to do so have changed dramatically over the past decade. In my experience, the tools that we have at our disposal to deliver L&D content has not evolved at the same pace, at least not in terms of what is currently implemented in organizations. And what that does is it leads to the adoption problems that you articulated. Like, it's really hard to get people to read the email, sign up for the class, actually show up and sit in the classroom for a couple of hours undistracted learning. It's just that works some places and for some audiences, but there are other ways in which people are learning now, particularly the digitally native generation. And I think that without us catching up and adopting and delivering these new ways of learning, we're just not going to be able to capture learners in the way that we were able to in the past.
Yeah. And I think that's a kind of a perfect segue into the next trend. One thing I'll mention here is, as a technically a member of Gen Z myself, is that, not just shorter attention spans are prevalent, but, I have friends who won't even watch movies because it's very hard to sit still for 2 hours, right? And that's the world that we're growing up in. And so, for folks who, or will watch it with subtitles because reading along is the only way that they can pay attention, right? And so I think that we are consistently competing in this world where all of the consumer apps and the tools that we use are rapidly outpacing, a lot of the technology and the ways that businesses are interacting with their employees, right? You're seeing something that used to be 2 or 3 years behind in sort of consumer experience now being 15, 20, 25 years behind if you compare the experience of the LMS to when I, open up TikTok and go through something, right? Kind of a good segue into our third one. And speaking of movies, so we know that push autonomous learning will be the new normal, and this for a lot of folks can be a hot topic of conversation. So this one's probably my favorite. A huge component for a lot of these folks is really thinking about how does learning today, why does learning today not work, and why has there historically been this huge deference from pushed first or automated or autonomous learning mediums. And what we always remind folks is think back to what we call the Netflix effect problem. So you just heard me mention movies and attention spans, right? But a lot of folks on the call, you're probably familiar with, watching movies, opening up Netflix. You're probably just as familiar with closing Netflix because you don't know what you should watch, right? Or aren't sure what to. Netflix even has this feature where they'll say, hey, not sure what to watch. And because it's become such a prolific retention problem for them, and that's despite spending billions of dollars per year on content, right? So even when we have this great content, people really can't find it. Additionally, what we're seeing, like we mentioned, consumer apps outpacing the business, is that for most consumer apps like Duolingo, Twitter, TikTok, this is what our learners and employees are using every day outside of work. Consumer tools tell us that pushing things is better than pulling things, right? You would never, you'd never download, if you've ever used Duolingo or something like TikTok, you'll notice they're constantly pushing you until a pull habit is established. And then you have to go manually turn off the pushes, right? None of these systems or tools are ever going to stop pushing or to stop nudging you, right, to get adoption. But at the same time, in L&D, a lot more of our content and our strategy is really more Netflix than it is Duolingo or Twitter. It's more, there's a lot of highly produced stuff. It might be great content, but it is sitting on a shelf. David, broadly, how are you seeing kind of this shift from push to pull play out, and how do you think this is going to impact kind of the learner experience?
Instead of sharing my own words, I'm going to share Matt Johnson's words from the chat because I think Matt summed it up perfectly. When learning platforms are intelligent enough to recognize learners' behaviors and patterns, what people in similar roles are engaging with, and how long people spend on your learning platform, we really start to get to the right content to the right people at the right time while cutting out some of the not so great content that might be available. I think that sums it up well. Like, this is all about pushing out the right stuff, right time, in the right way for that person to learn. And that's how we capture them and engage them in a way that they're going to keep on coming back.
Absolutely. And what we're seeing more broadly is that there is kind of this massive push to push first learning just across the ecosystem. I know that, I remember we'd started talking about this 4 or 5 years ago, and folks were saying, this is crazy, my culture is not ready for this, right? Which we'll get into in a little bit. This we, borrowed from our friends at the Josh Bersin Company. And basically what we're seeing is we have gone through this broad shift in this trend here in evolution from content-based, adaptive, AI-generated, and now we're getting into the world of autonomous learning, right? And so it's not just about pushing things to folks, but it's about, you'll notice kind of the language here on the far right, a system that, like Matt said, learns from behavior, dynamically updates content, dynamically updates the experience, and really just watches this learner consumption and then is personalizing the content and the experience as a result of that, right? And I think that that's what's really powerful, and that's what we're going to see over the next few years is just this massive push to almost an always-on learning system that's constantly engaging with learners. And I think we're much closer to that than folks realize. One other big component of this is really just kind of the idea that this autonomous learning is already happening, right? And so one thing Matt mentioned and David mentioned was this whole idea of right time and meeting learners at the right time, right? And what we've even seen, we'd actually built kind of like, if anyone's used Zapier, our product team ended up building a Zapier-like system just to make this happen, but it's fairly straightforward. We're seeing the first iterations of this where it's not that complicated, technically speaking, for us to say, look, someone was promoted to a manager in Workday, or a sales rep's win rate fell below 30% in Salesforce. And so as a result, we're going to do all of these things, right? And so more broadly, this is what the learning of the future will look like for a lot of these learners. As you come into an organization, you go through, your first week or two, your onboarding, your know-hows, your foundational topics. But some of these might have in-person programs. You're still going to have events. You're still going to have webinars, but you're going to have this stuff kind of pushed to you constantly. I know there's a lot of great kind of comments in chat. We're gonna get to those in a minute or two when we close there. David, any thoughts just on how the learner experience is going to shift as a result of kind of this always-on learning system, and what the business will see as a result?
One thing that I think is going to be really interesting is, and you have it up on the page here, but the ability to sequence out learning over a long time period and deliver in the right order the various activities that we want people to start learning how and practicing doing. Somebody made the comment in the chat that actual learning requires an active, is active and requires active engagement. And I think, something like what you've laid out here and being able to map out a thoughtful curriculum that gets delivered at the right time will give us a chance to, and give learners a chance to practice as they go and to pick up the right content before a particular action. So just like as an example, and you've got it here, having a career conversation, like nudging people at the right time as to how to have an effective career conversation right before they do it, then give them a chance to practice by actually doing it. I think it'll then become, a more rapid development cycle for people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess just to highlight that too, one thing we always talk about when we talk about this type of content is it spends about as much time being pragmatic about practice and talking about application of knowledge and saying, hey, go try this exercise. In that example, David, hey, I know you learned about the fundamentals of having a great career conversation because you've got one coming up. Go have that career conversation, come back, reflect on how that went. We can actually nudge these other people and see how it went for them, right? And so I think that a lot of this system, it is quite active. And because it's so multi-touch, and because there's so many touch points with the learner, and it's so kind of scenario and action based, we can actually start to see, okay, here's how this person's progressed throughout the course, and here's how their understanding has progressed throughout this learning experience, rather than just kind of us talking to them and just pushing a bunch of content that's going to be received passively. Last big component here with push and automated learning is really just these big concerns. And David, I know we've talked about this a little bit, but these are the most common kind of reasons we think that push learning didn't happen sooner, and why it's really just getting its heyday now is folks are concerned that learners feel spammed, it's too complex to push to everyone, and the culture isn't ready for it. But while we've seen consumer apps, like I mentioned, pushing and nudging for 10 to 15 years, we're only just starting to see this advent in L&D and HR. for a lot of the professionals on the phone, they might be thinking, hey, this stuff sounds really cool, but I've got a lot of these concerns, right? David, any recommendations just for organizations or for individuals who might be facing some of this broader pushback about kind of this next evolution of push learning?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think the fundamentals of driving change are first deeply understanding the people that you're solving the problem for. And oftentimes I have seen a gap between the thing that we're solving for the 98% and what the 2% who are oftentimes in the decision-making seats, what they experienced during the course of their career. So I think the first part is like bridging the gap and more deeply understanding the people that we're solving problems for, and then articulating that to the leaders who we need both buy-in and sponsorship from. But then like also, starting with experiments, I think, testing out, we talked about like low risk ways to test out using AI in your daily practice. I think starting there and starting to show the positive results, particularly the positive results compared to the prior state, I think that's going to be the stuff that starts to sell the organization, start to change the culture, and allow us to evolve at a more rapid pace.
Absolutely. I think that that's what, and that kind of segues nicely into some of our broad takeaways. You'll see from a lot of these things, we've talked about AI broadly, and we've talked about kind of this whole need for L&D to make this shift to more revenue driving. Our call to action here on the second one, exactly what you just said, lead from the front and experiment, right? Something David and I were talking about is that L&D is pretty well prepped to experiment with some of these different things. I think that, there is this huge component of being able to rapidly create content. We obviously have to be careful about kind of the quality and the nature of it. But at the end of the day, we do have a real opportunity here as professionals to experiment and to showcase something to the business that's going to be different. And so a few broad takeaways for us, just for folks on the call, and we'll be staying on for a few minutes to answer questions. So feel free to throw questions in chat or in Q&A. Is that one, AI is overtaking every part of L&D. This year is really going to be where it gets foundational, adopted en masse. And so start to experiment, start to try that out. Our second one is once you've experimented, lead from the front, bring this to business leaders, right? Really go back to them and push kind of their thinking and push the envelope of how that works. And then third, how people learn is fundamentally changed. If we still have a pull first, kind of a Netflix strategy versus a Duolingo strategy, then we're going to be sinking all of our money into entertainment that doesn't get viewed. David, any kind of broad takeaways or advice for L&D leaders thoughtfully before we jump to questions?
I mean, I think these takeaways are perfect. I'm actually going to link it back to a comment that Ted made earlier on the chat that I'll summarize as, this is the stuff that L&D professionals have been dreaming about for some time, but we also need to be cautious or aware of the fact that in organizations, particularly those who don't have as much of a culture of learning as I think all of us would like, that it may result, like if AI takes over a lot of the administrative tasks, it may result in L&D professionals being either redeployed or headcounts being reduced. So I think we need to be aware of that. But you said it in this first broad takeaway, AI is overtaking every part of L&D. It's coming and it's happening regardless. And I do think that as professionals in the workplace, if we're able to lead from the front, this is an opportunity for us to, particularly in organizations which may not have as much of an emphasis on learning, for us to actually show the incredible power that we can have and that we can deliver as L&D professionals. And I think it's a chance for us to kind of increase the opinions of others in terms of what L&D can deliver. So yeah, I don't want to be naive and also not acknowledge the fact that CEOs across the board, as AI begins to transform the workplace, may look to shift priorities and shift headcounts and so on. But there's also a really big opportunity here. And I think regardless, this is happening. And those of us who embrace it and who lead from the front will, I just think, have a better time over the next couple of years and be able to really drive interesting change, but also be more well-positioned for whatever's to come next.
Absolutely. Well said, David. And thank you so much again for joining us and for taking the time. For folks on the call, we'll take a few questions now, but I am going to leave this up. This was an Arist course that we'd made with our friends at the Josh Barson Academy, and so feel free to scan the QR code to start or text predict to 20202. You'll get a text message course for a few days on a lot of these broad predictions for 2024. So David, I know that there's a number of comments in the chat here, really just around, I think Jeff made a really good comment. As we move into this new era, we do need to remember that learning is not entertainment, and that the principles of entertainment, let me get that back up for folks. The principles of entertainment don't transfer over one to one. Any just comments on that broadly?
I mean, clearly they don't transfer over one to one perfectly. That being said, if we can make learning more entertaining and more engaging, I do think for a certain type of learner, that's a way that we're going to capture their attention, more so than perhaps the current methodologies. But I'm also thinking about this comment in the context of the ability to curate more bespoke and customized learning, right? Some people may learn better in a short video, entertaining type interaction. Others may learn very differently. And I think as we get more advanced in our ability to understand the needs of each learner and deliver the content to them in a way in which they will best learn and absorb it, I think that's also going to help us deliver more impactful learning because it's curated to that every single person that you are delivering it to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one other comment that I'll call out here before we wrap is, you're not going to totally agree. There's the adage that you won't get replaced by AI, but someone who knows AI. And I think that that's a really good kind of idea to end on. One thing I'll leave folks with is that we've worked with a lot of teams on how to do this. And what most folks find is that they'll say, hey, this is really complicated. I don't know how to do this. The tooling is really, it's made to be quite user-friendly. And AI broadly, ChatGPT, we've seen this, right? AI tools are made to be quite easy for the individual to get started with. And so our recommendation for folks is just get started, try this out. And really it just comes down to who actually tried and who took action on attempting these things, rather than needing kind of a really deep set of competencies. Even something like prompting, folks can get really good at in 1 or 2 days, right? And so just that pace of development is really fast. Well, I see a few other comments in here. David, we're gonna wrap just for time, but thank you so much again for joining us. If folks want to get in touch with David, feel free to reach out to us at Arist, and we'll connect you. But in the meantime, we'll send folks a recording of this after, and be sure to sign up for the course from the Josh Barson Academy once again. Thanks so much, everyone, and thanks again, David.
Yeah, pleasure.